You may not know it, but a new Silent Hill movie came out this weekend, and it's not getting very good reviews. You may not have heard of it because there's not a lot of marketing for it, and it's only playing in very select theaters. So, yeah, I was able to see it, and I feel the need to kind of get on here and defend it a little bit, play devil's advocate, and because that's what I do here on this channel is advocate for misunderstood movies. So let's get into it. First of all, I want to say that I have never played any of the Silent Hill games, and if that just invalidates my opinion on the movie, you think, then go ahead. Sure, that's fine. But I also think it's important when you're adapting a video game or a book or anything into a movie that it's important for people who don't have understanding of the source material to still be able to enjoy the movie, and that's what I was able to do. Sure, there were specific things in the movie which I'm sure were directly from the video games that I just wasn't able to understand, like to know that's from the video game, but thankfully I had a guy behind me sitting in the theater who was watching it with his like girlfriend or wife or whatever, and whenever there was something directly from the video game, he would lean over and say like what it was to his girlfriend, and he talked very loudly, so I was able to understand all the Easter eggs and references. It was like having one of those videos going on in real time. So yes, I enjoyed the movie, but I definitely had some problems with it. But I think the good outweighs the bad, and that's what I'm going to try and say in this video. Let's start with the bad, meaning the beginning of the movie. First of all, it seems very independent, kind of low budget, even though it doesn't look like it at parts, but a lot of like production companies went into this to the point it is sort of like the Family Guy gag of just like more and more logos keep appearing on screen, and to a point it did get comical where my theater was kind of laughing once a new like name and logo popped up on the screen. But anyway, once we get past that, then it's the opening of the movie where it's sort of this meet cute between our two protagonists, James and Mary. Now this opening sequence, like 15 minutes long, is kind of hard to watch. While I was sitting there in the theater, I was like, oh god, like what did I just get myself into? Like this is gonna be a bad movie. I'm not prepared for this, because visually it does not look the best. It's like really like kind of overlit, really bright. The dialogue is also kind of iffy, and just how they meet, it leads itself to a lot of like CinemaSins-esque criticisms of like, why doesn't the girl just do this? Why doesn't the guy just do this? The problems could be solved if they just did this. And so yeah, the opening was a little rough, but then we get a title card drop around like 15 minutes in. We see the name of the movie, Return to Silent Hill. I was like, okay, that was just the setup. That's over now. And after that card drop, then we get into it. And I believe this movie is based off of the second video game, which is why it's called Return to Silent Hill. But within the context of the movie, by the way, it's not connected to the previous two like Silent Hill movies from the 2000s. Completely separate. You don't need to watch those two. So the movie is really about James and Mary, who after their meet cute at the beginning had a whole relationship, but then we cut to some point in the future where they've broken up, but then James gets a letter from Mary that's like, hey, you need to come back to Silent Hill and find me. Silent Hill is the name of the town Mary lives in, so James is like, I gotta return to Silent Hill, hence the title of the movie. And once James does return to Silent Hill, it's very creepy, and that's where the good stuff starts happening. That's when the production design and lighting and like just visually this movie kicks in and looks a lot better than the first 15 minutes. And if this was like a super low budget that needed money from all these companies, you can't really tell. It doesn't look like it. It looks good. The production design is high quality. It looks shot on a practical set. I'm sure like parts of it of course were CGI and like all that ash and stuff, but the CGI did look good. And basically from that part of the movie, it's just James walking around town trying to figure out what happened, what's going on. He doesn't really encounter that many people. He finds like a homeless person who just says like cryptic things and then dies. And then there's like the monsters that come out, like the armless ones. Those looked really good. Again, the CGI and visual effects on those were like really good. And then what I assume is a feature of the Silent Hill game, after a while like an alarm goes off and then the gray ashy town turns into like a red nightmarish town where like a bunch of bugs and monsters come after you, and that's when things get dangerous and James has to hide and fight his way through this town and try to find Mary. Basically, not a lot of plot happens, but it visually looks really good, and in a horror sense, I really liked it. There aren't that many jump scares, but there are a handful of jump scares, but I found myself, like, the horror comes from the dread of the unknown, of like what's going on. This town is empty. It's like he's basically the only guy there. He doesn't have the answers. That's where the horror comes from, and very much like I think the horror of the video game, I could assume. I'm sure there are also jump scares in the video game, but the horror is the unknown and sort of the desolation, the isolation of the character. But some of the scariest parts of the movie are the creature designs, which of course I believe are taken from the game. I know at least the big pyramid head, is that what he's called? Triangle head? Comes from the game. He looked great in this. That section of the movie I thought was great, when James is like running away from big pyramid head guy with a giant sword, even though at that point of the movie it doesn't really make sense what's going on and like why he's doing this. But then there's also another creature that's like a spider woman who also looked very well. Again, the CGI is very well done. And just the horror elements of that visually, great body horror. Like, again, I was just having a blast. It just felt like it was kind of like, at this point of the movie, just a nonstop ride of things happening. And again, not much plot. We don't really still know what's going on. Like, why are these people here? Why are there monsters? Why is there a pyramid head guy? We don't know, but it's just still like a fun ride that we're on, and it's much more of, I'd say, like a visual experience than it is like a plot heavy thing, which is very much like the first Silent Hill movie that came out in the 2000s. The plot in that movie is very convoluted, doesn't really make that much sense. Again, I'm sure it's taken from the video game, so maybe the video game is like that. But again, in a video game, you have more than 2 hours to explain your story. So in this movie, I really liked that it doesn't concern itself too much with exposition or plot. We do get, James does meet some other guy just like in a bathroom. Those are some of my least favorite parts of the movie, because the dialogue in this scene is very like exposition heavy. Whenever he encounters a character, it's either heavy exposition or they just talk so cryptically and like kind of just cliche cryptic things of like, oh, you don't want to find out what happened here, like you don't want to encounter them, and it's like, who's them? And so again, the good stuff comes from just James being alone and sort of that isolation horror that I was talking about, and him just discovering all these like horrific creatures and things that take place in Silent Hill. He finds a little kid named Laura who has a really creepy baby doll, wink wink, and I thought, that child actor was good. She has huge creepy eyes. Of course, the whole movie can't just be James running around with not a lot of plot happening. Eventually he does need to find answers about Mary. He figures out that Mary is in the hospital, so he goes to the hospital, and on his way he encounters a woman who looks very similar to Mary, and in fact it is played by the same actress who plays Mary, and that's like kind of the point. And so you're like, what's going on? Like, why is this woman who looks exactly like Mary, just with a different haircut, here, but she's not Mary? And that, again, like, once he first meets that character, he doesn't go, oh, you look exactly like Mary. He just keeps that to himself, and then it's just like, come along with me. And then they get to the hospital again. The nurses, like this, like mannequin-esque nurses, which I believe are from the game, because the guy behind me told his girlfriend. They looked great. The production design of the hospital, very creepy. And then he encounters this one monster, which I loved the design of it, and again, all the creatures and monsters very well CGI, like done. Like, again, a bunch of companies pitched in with like money on this movie, and I'm sure with their small budget, they really were able to do a lot visually with the CGI. But after James encounters that monster at the hospital, That's when the movie, I think, is really getting a lot of its negativity from critics and online, because then the last 20 minutes of this movie really just kind of go downhill, down Silent Hill. I will say, something I forgot to mention is that there are flashbacks throughout the movie of when James and Mary were in a relationship and they were happy. And at the beginning, it's very much like cliche, like dead wife montage sort of energy. But then as the flashbacks go on, you discover a lot more sinister things about Mary's past. And it's sort of built up to be like, oh, Mary's dad is sort of a really bad guy. There's like sort of this cult aspect of Silent Hill, and whatever's going on in the town right now is connected to the cult and Mary's dad. And then we get to the end of the movie, and then it just becomes sort of like a trippy sequence where it keeps cutting to different timelines, and just James is getting pulled into like different locations. And I guess spoilers, I guess, for right now. Jump to this time if you don't want spoilers. The last 20 minutes of the movie just go on to introduce the idea that, in fact, this is all just in James's head. And this whole thing has just been a metaphor for grief about losing his wife to cancer or like some terminal illness. And that the whole creepy thing about Silent Hill isn't real. He's just a very like disturbed, like sort of mentally ill guy who's having these visions of, you know, this horrific thing. And it's all a metaphor for the horrors of losing a loved one that you care deeply about. And there's some really cool imagery in there about that, but how the movie goes about sort of explaining it doesn't really work that much. As I was saying, the whole thing in the flashback montages is built up to be some like supernatural thing to do with like a cult and Mary's dad, and I'm sure that's still a part of it maybe, but at the same time it's just all in his head. So like it feels like it wants to have it both ways, but either just make it in his head and it's a whole metaphor for grief, that's fine. Or what I think I would have personally preferred is just make it Mary's dad was part of like a cult leader and they did paranormal stuff and now they like cursed the town, which I think is a lot more interesting because we've done the grief metaphor in so many other horror movies that it's like, come on, I just want to see cool creepy stuff happening, in my opinion. And yeah, these last 20 minutes just drag James from random like flashback to like something in his head to something in his head, and it's revealed that he is Pyramid Head and he has the power, like he can control things because he kills Mary's look-alike twin ? And the kid Laura is also like Mary as a kid. Like everyone, he's like, that is Mary, and then that's also Mary, but then Mary's dead, and it just keeps jumping around from thing to thing, and eventually it's like this flashback thing of him letting Mary go, and then the movie ends with somehow them going back in time and like just driving away from Silent Hill altogether. Which I thought what was going to happen is that I thought James was just going to let Mary go on the bus and leave, and just be like, okay, like, you know, we weren't meant to work out, like I have to let her go in order for her to live a happy life. But instead he's like, no, you can just come with me, but we're not going to go to Silent Hill, which I thought was kind of funny. Okay, spoilers over. Yeah, the last 20 minutes did not work for me at all, really, and was sort of like goes kind of against what felt like the whole movie was building up to. But again, the visuals and some creature scary stuff that happens in the last 20 minutes were done very well, but just story-wise not executed in the way that I had hoped, because I was having a really fun time of the fast-paced James running around Silent Hill encountering these creatures, but then it just sort of comes to a screeching halt. I can't say L's, dude. It comes to a screeching stop, and then changes up the pace in a way I didn't really like. But overall, I think the super like fun time I had during like the middle, like act 2, I thought that was great. I was having a blast. I was at the edge of my seat. I was engaged. And again, it's like one of those things, this is going to be a completely so random, like don't clip this out of context thing, but it's kind of like 2001: A Space Odyssey, where it's much more just a display of visuals than like an actual story with a plot, which, you know, I didn't mind because the visuals were cool and done really well. Another thing that I really liked, but I can see some people not liking, is the camera movement and direction. Basically, there are very few static shots in this movie. Most of the time the camera is just moving around like this, like swirling in some sort of direction, and I thought it was just a signal of like the higher quality of the movie, because and like the budget of just them not wanting just to do static shot reversed shots for like every single scene, but instead actually, you know, had the time and commitment to set up these more complicated shots, which I appreciated. Another thing I forgot to mention about the direction is that there are quite a handful of first-person POV shots throughout this movie, and from my understanding, Silent Hill, the video game, is not a first-person game, but maybe they are later in the franchise, but it was still a great, like, homage to horror video games as a whole, and they were just shot really well, built the suspense. There were cool creative things done with them, like looking in a mirror and just other things that I just was really well done. And then, of course, at the end of the movie, I was like, who directed this? I need to know, because it felt like, in my mind, I thought it was just like some newcomer, and I was like, oh great, like I'm glad they did this, so then, you know, they can launch their career into other things. But no, it's the guy who directed the first Silent Hill movie in the 2000s. It's the same guy, and now he's back all these years later to do it again, and I thought he did a really good job. Do I think it deserves all the hate it's getting? No. Do I think some of the critiques are valid? Yes, specifically about the ending. But I still had a great time with it. I was engaged. It made me want to play the video games, and maybe I think video game fans might, you know, have the right to be upset in a way that I'm not, because they could be like, oh, that's not, you know, a good representation of the thing I love, which, you know, I can't tell you you're wrong. But I think this movie is just a perfect movie to put on in the background of like a Halloween party, of like you can just like come in at any point in the movie, just watch the crazy visuals that are happening, and then just leave at any point, and you can just come in and out of it. And I think that's where this movie works perfectly, in sort of that setting, which maybe sounds like a bad review of it, but in my opinion, I'd like, very few select movies are good to play in the background of parties, and this is one of them. So yeah, that's why I enjoyed Return to Silent Hill, even though the ending maybe left me a bit off. I don't think that like completely erases all the good stuff that's in the middle of this movie, because I really enjoyed it. But let me know what you think of Return to Silent Hill. Are you gonna see it? Are you gonna stay away from it? Am I completely wrong and just paid out by whatever company made this, whatever like 20 companies made this movie? Let me know, and be sure to check out this next video right now.